in the prophecy of Yoel, he speaks of an invading army that is coming into the land of Israel before them. It is like the Garden of Eden. And anyone who's been to Israel, been down the Dead Sea Valley, the lowest point on planet Earth, hot as next to Hades. It is so hot down there, but yet what do you see? Mile after mile after mile of greenhouses filled with vegetation that feeds the world. Not just Israel, but it's actually shipped to Japan and goes out all over the world to feed the hungry all over the world. It's like the Garden of Eden now, but when this army comes in, it's like the Garden of Eden before them. Behind them, it is a smoldering, desolate wasteland. Nothing can stop this army. There is no way that they can be impeded. And yet the Almighty calls for his people to call a fast, call everyone to repentance, to call upon the name of Yehovah. And it says that the Almighty fights from heaven for them, that the stench of their enemies goes up into the stratosphere. And then it says, in those days, it says the sun is going to be turned to darkness, the moon into blood. This is because of the war. It's not eclipses it's talking about. It's because of this war, the darkness, the desolation, blackness upon all the faces, the sun turned to darkness, the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call upon the name of
the Lord
shall be delivered. No, it's not the Lord. Nehemia, help us with this, because we have, we not have Peter on the day of Shavuot also quoting this very verse?
He quotes it verbatim, and definitely in the Greek, in Acts 2:21, it says, "It shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of
what?
The Lord. And there it's the Greek word kurios.
Kurios.
Whosoever call on the name of the kurios shall be saved." And you have to wonder, so when Peter spoke these words in Jerusalem in the first century, and let's assume that he spoke the language that would be spoken, that would be used for a sermon, certainly a sermon in Jerusalem. If you were in the marketplace, you might speak Greek, you might speak Aramaic, you might speak Hebrew.
He's on the Temple Mount on the day of Shavuot.
He's giving a sermon. A sermon's going to be in Hebrew. So he's giving this sermon, and he's saying this in Hebrew. What name did he use? Did he say the Lord? Did he say Adonai? Or did he speak the actual name Yehovah? And if you look back in Joel where we started, it says in the Hebrew, whosoever shall call on the name of Yehovah shall be saved. Now, what did the original say? What did Peter originally say? I don't know. It wasn't there. But there's a really interesting clue, Michael. I want to show the audience something. So what we have here is a page from one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, there's two sets of Dead Sea Scrolls. There's the early ones that were put in the caves in the year 68 AD when the Romans came. And then the Romans came back in 135 during what's called the Bar Kokhba Revolt. This is from the Bar Kokhba Revolt. It's called 8 Chever 12, which means it was found in Nachal Chever, the 8th cave, scroll number 12. And it's a Greek copy of the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the ancient Greek translation of the Tanakh. And what you can see here very plainly, even if you don't read Greek, is there's one word that appears in this page, which is, again, it's Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23, which talks about 10 men of all the nations coming and grabbing and holding on under the corner of the garment of the Jew, saying, "We have heard Yehovah is with you." That's the passage here.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the name Yehovah, that's written in Paleo-Hebrew. Even though the text is Greek and reads left to right, when you come to the name of the creator of the universe, the Father, in Greek, they wrote Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in the earliest Septuagint manuscripts as in Paleo-Hebrew.
Right to left.
Right to left, right,
Yeah.
exactly. And what happened is over time, the Jewish tradition came about of not speaking the name, and the Christian scribes said, well, we don't know how to write that word. That's some word we don't know those letters. We know every letter on this page, but these 4 letters, and they eventually replaced it with the Greek word kurios. And so here's the question I have. When Peter wrote this, and let's assume for a second that...
Or spoke it.
When he spoke it and it was written down in Acts, let's even assume it was written in Greek. It was probably, I think it was in Hebrew, Acts, but let's assume it was written in Hebrew and then translated into Greek or written in Greek. Either way, when it was in Greek, would they have done something different in the first century, writing in Greek a sermon quoting the Old Testament than they did with the Old Testament itself? In other words, when they wrote this in Greek and they came to that name, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, wouldn't they have just written it in the Paleo-Hebrew? Now, we don't have that manuscript of Acts in Hebrew. It doesn't exist as far as I know, right? Where it's written in Greek, but with Paleo-Hebrew.
You're one of the few people on the planet who would know, who's
I haven't
done
found,
the search.
I haven't found that one yet.
Okay.
Maybe one day. I hope so. But in any event, even if they wrote it in Greek or translated it into Greek, they would have written the name Yehovah in Paleo-Hebrew and then eventually changed it with Lord. And this is an important point because I deal with some Christians who will say, well, Nehemia, you're not one of us. You're not a Christian, so you don't understand. Every word in the Greek New Testament is God-breathed. Every Greek word. And if you try to say that the original was Hebrew, you're saying it's just a translation. Well, the church fathers said it was a translation. Papias said in the first century, I quote it in my book, Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus, he said, Matthew wrote the words in the Hebrew language and each translated them as he was able. That's the earliest testimony of the Gospel of Matthew from around the year 100, give or take, from this man named Papias, a church father. So this isn't Nehemia, the non-believer, who's saying this. This is the church father saying it, that some of these words at least were written in Hebrew and then translated. And so I don't want to get into your theology.
Other church fathers said that they saw the Hebrew Matthew.
Jerome says in the 5th century, he was in Caesarea Maritima on the shore of what today is Israel, and he saw a copy of the Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew. So we know there were Hebrew documents that were translated into Greek, unless you just think the church fathers made it all up, which some scholars do. But if you believe the earliest testimony we have of these Gospels, that some of them were written in Hebrew and translated into Greek, and that definitely seems to be the case from the internal evidence. I talk about that in the book, Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. I think, and I can't prove it because I don't have the original document, but it makes sense to me that the earliest Greek version of Acts would have been just like the Greek version of Joel, which was written in Greek until it got to the name and it was written in Paleo-Hebrew. And over time, we know that in the Joel, it was replaced with kurios in the Greek, not in the Hebrew. And presumably the same thing happened in Acts, that when they came to that name, Yehovah, they changed it to Lord, because they did the same thing in the Old Testament. And so it shall come to pass, whosoever will call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. But what Peter spoke in the 1st century, it makes sense that this would have been Yehovah, certainly to the audience. Now this is one of the...
And again, Yeshua's first words,
Yehovah Yoshia.
Yoshia.
Right. Now, Michael, one of the things I've heard from and I'm talking about I'm not talking about like internet stuff. I'm talking about like solid Christian scholars. In fact, there was a man who wrote a book called Yahweh at Patmos. And Yahweh of Patmos, written by Professor Sean McDonough in 1999. And this is considered the definitive work in Christian scholarship that proves that Jesus Christ never spoke the name Yehovah or Yahweh. He's not even dealing with how to pronounce it. He's saying that name, which in later Jewish tradition was forbidden, that Jesus followed the ban on speaking the name. He argues this in a book. It's a great book. I've read it. And it has some wonderful things in it. But I think one of the things he's missing is what we just saw, which is that in the earliest manuscripts where they wrote in Greek, when it came to the name, they wrote it as Yud-He-Vav-He, as Yehovah, in Paleo-Hebrew, and it was the Christian Gentile scribes who replaced that with Lord. So I think he misses that point. But, one of the things I shared with you, Michael, is that I've come across in my research, we talked about Hebrew Matthew. Well, recently I discovered a Hebrew manuscript of the book of Revelation. And this Hebrew Revelation, it's only a chapter and a half. But one of the really...
That's all that's extant.
That's all that I found. That's all, that's all that I know of. It's, and the beauty of it is today anybody can go online to the British Library, which used to be the British Museum Library, go to the British Library website. It's part of a worldwide project of digitizing all Hebrew manuscripts. And this manuscript is called Sloan 273. And let me pull it up here. I have it right in front of me, and we'll show it here on the screen. And let me just see here real quick. And the beautiful thing here is in this passage in Revelation. And can you read me Revelation? I believe it's 1:4. What do you have there in Revelation 1:4? Read me that from the Greek. And this is actually the basis of the idea of Yahweh at Patmos. Is he starts off and he says, look, Jesus at Patmos, when he revealed himself to John, he didn't use the name Yehovah. He revealed himself in a very different way. And I'm sorry, it's actually 1:8.
Okay, yeah, okay. This is King James. Yeah. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is, and which was, and which is to come, the Almighty.
So here, according to the understanding of this Yahweh at Patmos by McDonough, and most Christian scholars, this is Jesus talking, and he's saying, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. That's what it means, the first and last letters of the alphabet. And now was the chance to say that he's Yehovah, and he doesn't say it. And the beautiful thing here is in this Hebrew manuscript in the British Library. Now, is this the Hebrew original? I don't know. This is one of these manuscripts that shows up, and we don't know if it was translated from Greek or if this is an early Hebrew manuscript.
And it isn't. It's a mystery. It's a manuscript. It's handwritten. It is ancient.
It shows up. This particular manuscript, I believe, was purchased in the 17th century. It probably shows up. It was probably written about 100 years before that. And here's what it says in Hebrew. He says, "Ani ha'alef ve'hatav." I am the Aleph and the Tav. Omer Yehovah ha'Elohim. Says Yehovah Elohim, Yehovah God. So here he's speaking, the speaker here saying, I'm the Aleph and the Tav. And it's beautiful because in Greek it says Alpha and Omega, which is the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. The first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet are Aleph and Tav. Now I've heard people speculate that in the original Hebrew it wouldn't have said Alpha and Omega, it would have said Aleph, Tav. Okay, that could be. Here I have it.
Here you have it.
I have it in a manuscript. And then it says Yehovah God. And Yehovah there is written with the full vowels as Yehovah, not as Yahweh, not as Yahuwah, but as Yehovah from this manuscript. It's beautiful. And one of the things that's missing that I think is lost when you translate this into Greek is what you just read. And read that one more time, the end of the verse where he says, I am the Almighty.
Which is, which was, and which is to come, the Almighty.
Was, and is to come. When I hear that, I immediately hear that in Hebrew, which is the Hebrew phrase, Haya Hoveh Yehieh, which literally can be translated, he was, he is to come, or you can change the order. And in fact, in Revelation, it appears 3 times. Sometimes it appears he is, he was, or he was, he is. That's not important in Hebrew. But the meaning of the name Yehovah, the meaning of the name of the Father, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, is Haya Hoveh Yehieh. He was, he is to come. That's the translation, the meaning of the name. And it says it there in Revelation.
Right, 1:8, and it goes right back to when Moses was given the name. What shall I tell them your name is?
It's beautiful. Right.
Take us to...
Right, well, so Michael, I was recently, and I do this podcast called Hebrew Voices, and I was interviewing this Samaritan leader, man who's written 107 books. Really smart guy. He's considered the top Samaritan scholar, meaning among the Samaritans. And I asked him the question which was obvious to me. I said, how do you Samaritans pronounce God's name, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh? He says, we don't pronounce the name. I said, really? Okay, well, how'd you pronounce it in ancient times? He said, we never pronounced it. Interesting. And we can get back to that maybe. But he says, but I can tell you what it means. I said, well, what does it mean? I know what it means, but what do you think it means? He says it means Haya Hoveh Yehieh. He was, he is to come. And so why do you think it means that? I know why it means that. And he said the same reason any Jew would say. Exodus 3:14, God reveals himself to Moses and he says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which literally is, I will be that which I will be, or I am that which I am. And that is from the Hebrew verb to be. And in the very next verse, he says, and Yehovah said further to Moses, thus shall you say to the children of Israel, and then he reveals his name, Yehovah, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. And what you have to understand is when you read this in Hebrew, this is patently obvious. When you have the prefix, the aleph prefix, as an Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh, it means I am. And when you have the Yud prefix, as in Yehovah, it means he will be. So Yehovah presents himself and says, I will be that which I will be. And he says, this is what you're going to call me. You're not going to call me I am. You're going to call me Yehovah, which is a combination of the 3 forms of the verb Haya, Hoveh, Yehieh. Even the Samaritans know that. Every Jew knows that. We sing it in the synagogue. I grew up singing it in the synagogue. Vehu Haya, Vehu Hoveh, Vehu Yehieh B'tifara. Every synagogue in the world, maybe they have a different tune and maybe they sing it better than me, but every synagogue in the world, they know that the name means Haya, Hoveh, Yehieh. And even the book of Revelation, to me, Michael, that's 3 witnesses. The Samaritans And this, you can't tell me the Samaritans got this from the Jews, right? They say they have their independent line of information. According to 2 Kings 17, that independent line of information goes to the time of the time of Hezekiah, 700 BC, right? They were broken off from the Jews from 700 BC, and they know what they learned from their priests that came from the 10 tribes, is the name means Yehovah. Jews know it's Yehovah, and even the book of Revelation says 3 times it says it, that his name is, he says, was, is, and is to come. That's the meaning of the name Yehovah. So the actual name's lost in the Greek, but the meaning of the name appears. They didn't lose that. And the reason is there was no ban on the meaning of the name. The Jewish ban and the Roman ban pertained to the pronunciation of the name Yehovah, but the meaning of the name, I don't think the Romans even knew the significance of that. They didn't catch it. They didn't tie into it. It's beautiful.